Hello everyone, today we're going to be taking a look at the brand new 2024 Norco Sight. I've actually been able to ride this bike for the past 3 months, so we've got a full review on the way. But before we get into my ride impressions, let's start with some of the basics. Just like the previous version, it has 150 millimeters of rear travel, 160 millimeter fork, and it's aimed at that kind of ambiguous all-mountain category. You can get it with an aluminum frame or a carbon frame. There's 4 carbon models, 2 aluminum models, and there's also frame-only options. But really, the big talking point is going to be that high pivot suspension design. Previous version was a fairly typical horse link layout. This new one, it's still a horse link, but now you have that high pivot designed to give it a more rearward axle path. Along with the options for either the aluminum or carbon frame, there are also air shock equipped and coil shock equipped versions. And the cool thing with those coil shock versions, they all come with a spring deck system, which allows you to alter the spring rate without needing to actually take the shock off and swap springs. As far as the geometry of the Sight goes, Norco is now going with a numbered system. So rather than saying small, medium, large, XL, they say sizes 1 through 5. So same idea, but different naming. Something we've seen other companies do as well. All the bikes have a 64-degree head tube angle, and the seat tube angle is a fairly steep 77-ish degrees. That changes depending on the size of the bike. And the chainstays also vary depending on the size of the bike. Something Norco's been doing for years. Kind of nice just to see those geometry numbers tweaked in order to make a consistent feel across all the sizes. Chainstay lengths increase by around 4 millimeters per size. Should talk about sizing a little bit. You can go onto Norco's website and they've got a really nice ride aligned calculator that helps spit out all the pertinent information. You just put in your height, weight, riding style. It'll recommend a size. For me, I'm right in the middle of size 3 and 4. So 3 would probably be a medium-ish and size 4 would be a large XL-ish. Again, trying to decide, sizing is a kind of a tricky thing these days. For me, I ended up going with the size 3 with a reach of 472.5 millimeters. Over the years, I found that my preferred reach lies somewhere between 470 to 490. There's obviously a range there. So all the numbers on this size 3 worked well for me, although I will say that the seat tubes are very short, so I ended up with a lot of dropper posts sticking out. Luckily, Norco specs a 210 millimeter dropper, so not the end of the world. It all worked out, but I will say that really short seat tube length was one of the kind of outliers as far as the geometry numbers go for me. So once I got the bike all set up, starting with the settings that Norco recommended on that ride aligned guide, headed out, do some climbing because you got to do that before you go down. Climbing on this, it's pretty good. Actually, I'd say we'll go really good. You know, it's easy to pigeonhole a bike when you see the high pivot layout as some sort of downhill specific machine, but that design actually works very well when climbing, specifically technical climbing. You know, if you're just grinding along on a fire road, you do notice that idler pulley noise and the bike's not that light, so that's one side of the thing. But if you go to technical climbs, the time we have really chunky rocks and roots and kind of slow speed maneuvers, it does a great job. There's a ton of traction, and some of that is obviously going to be due to the coil shock, but also that suspension layout. I think that rearward axle path in the beginning of the travel really helps the rear wheel not get hung up. The overall wheelbase of the bike isn't super long, so you can kind of maneuver in those slow speed bits. We kind of have to maybe even toss a little hop in. It does a great job at that. So the traction's there, and it can really clamber its way up some technical climbs. I could see this as being a good bike somewhere in the desert. Say if you're in Sedona or Moab, we just kind of have really stair-steppy, techie climbs. It'd be great for that. It's not, I'd say it's efficient, but for people that want that kind of hardtail-like efficiency, you're not gonna find it. But overall, it does a good job of resisting pedal bob. I didn't really need to use the climb switch. The only time I did was just kind of more of a mental thing on really long, smooth grinds. But anytime there's any undulations in the terrain, fully open, even with that coil shock, it's really good at climbing. And the proportions worked well for me too. Nice upright climbing position, but I didn't feel too crunched. Even though my seat post, the amount of seat post sticking up was to the sky, it was still fine. I think the overall fit of the bike worked well for me. I did mention that idler pulley noise, and I should just kind of want to reiterate, it is noticeable, especially on smoother sections of climbing or on kind of if you got a paved road grind out to your local trails. If the chain's well lubed, it works pretty well, like it quiets it down, but depending on the length of the ride, it does become noticeable again. It's something I've encountered on almost all high pivot suspension layouts. For some people, it's gonna be maybe kind of annoying, other people not as much, so something to keep in mind. I was able to live with it. I'd say I'm pretty sensitive to noise, and I think the bike's performance outweighs that little extra decibel levels, but you know, just a note to mention. I also mentioned that weight before, 35 pounds. We're talking about climbing. That's kind of where you would notice the weight, and realistically, I didn't actually notice that much. To be fair, I have been riding some pretty heavy bikes lately, some big chunky aluminum things, but I didn't weigh this bike until really just before recording this, and I would have thought it was a little bit lighter. So that's a testament to how well it rides. If you really were going to be gram conscious, you could probably put some carbon wheels on it, maybe a carbon bar, maybe an air shock if you really wanted to knock weight, but I don't think it's something to worry too much about. But again, it is on the heavier side. My first ride on the site took place on Vancouver's North Shore, which is a fitting location considering that's where a good amount of the bike's development took place. Now, the shore isn't quite as janky and awkward as it used to be, but there's still plenty of strange rock moves, lots of tight turns, good chunky terrain, so it's a great place to get accustomed to the bike. There's also some skinnies too, so I made sure to test it on skinnies, and it passed the skinny test, in case you're wondering. The site's axle path is very well managed and never felt like it was going too rearward, a trait that can sometimes make it feel strange in corners or when trying to get airborne. I didn't notice any of those issues with the site. It's actually pretty lively bike. Lively is probably too strong a word. Let's just say that it's calm, but when you want to get airborne, it's not that much work. It can maneuver quickly. It kind of feels more compact, a little more on the shorter side of things. Part of that is that chainstay length. I think for those tighter, more techy maneuvers, it feels great. I did find myself wondering if maybe add 10, 15 millimeters to the back end, how that would feel. I think that could add a little bit of stability. I don't know if that's necessarily a design issue, but I think personally, again, I've been riding some different bikes, longer chainstays, kind of been going into that camp, so something to consider. But as it sits, the bike is a good all-rounder. It doesn't feel like it's too much bike, and it really sits in that all-mountain category. I know it's not popular to say, but Norco says it, and I'm gonna say it, because it really fits. I'd put other bikes like Specialized Stump Jumper Evo, or maybe the Canyon Spectral, bikes with 150 millimeters of travel that can do a little bit of everything, and that's where the site also happily occupies that space. I never found myself wishing for any more travel on the site. I think that 150-160 blend works really well with the bike's characteristics, but if you wanted to, that shock stroke can be increased. You can remove a spacer and increase the travel of the bike to 160 millimeters, even put a 170 millimeter fork in the front. So if you wanted to get a little more travel, that's possible. But again, don't forget Norco has the range in their lineup already, and that's kind of the bike to go for if you're looking for that pedalable downhill machine. Could the site work as an enduro race bike? Yeah, it sure could. Does a great job handling terrain of all kinds. If you wanted to, you could put a 29-inch rear wheel on it. Like I mentioned, you could bump up the travel. So I think there's a lot of versatility, and the fact that you can get a carbon or an aluminum frame, it can really kind of be whatever you'd like it to. Let's go over the pros of the Norco site. The first one is the fact that it has great traction without feeling overly sluggish or lethargic. The second one is that it is versatile. You can get it in different options, mixed wheel compatible, aluminum, carbon. It can really be whatever you'd like it to. And then finally, on this build or on all the coil shock builds, it's really nice to see that it comes with that spring deck system. Just makes fine-tuning it even easier. No need to remove the shock. Kind of simplifies things for the end user or for shops as well. As far as cons go, I'm going to put no in-frame storage as one of the cons. I know I didn't mention it much in the review because it doesn't exist, but on this bike and at these price points, it'd be kind of nice to have a little spot to stick your snacks. Lots of other companies are doing it pretty well, so kind of feel like I would have liked to see that on the site. There's also the fact that the idler pulley is not the quietest, so something to keep in mind. And then final con, it's not that light. Again, it didn't really affect my impressions of the bike. Like I enjoyed it going up and down, but again, if you're someone that counts grams, 35 pounds on the heavier side for a all-mountain bike. Let's wrap things up. Who's the Norco site for? Well, I think it's for somebody that doesn't want that super long and slack enduro bike, but they also don't want a kind of light and spindly trail bike. It really falls in the middle. Somebody that likes to ride hard trails, likes to go fast, likes to climb as well. Someone that looks for a bike that has good technical climbing abilities and technical descending abilities. It's kind of an elusive category and it's hard to get it right, but I think with the site, Norco did a really good job. I think a lot of people are going to be happy with this bike, and it's a very good next generation. Takes things that they learned from the previous model, and it's an overall improvement. There you go. That's a quick rundown on the Norco site. Be sure to head to the homepage. You can check out the full written review. And before you go there, you should leave a comment below. Let us know. Do you think the site went in a good direction? Are you on the high pivot train? Or maybe not? Write some words and we'll read them. See you next time. Cut. Done.
You could go back a little. Perfect. Right out.
It's so narrow. We need lasers. That'd be good if you had lasers. All right.